Hello world, welcome back to Razor RC. Time to do another review video for you today. And today I'm going to be reviewing the Sanwa MX-6 radio transmitter. This is the 3-channel radio transmitter. Just came out about a month or two ago. Retails for $109.99, and hopefully you've seen my unboxing video and seen what's already comes in the package. But I thought I'd give you my full review now. I've been running this for about a week. Doing different things, racing, bashing, that sort of thing. And yeah, I've had quite a bit of experience with Sanwa radios. I've had 4 or 5 different Sanwas in the past, including the MXV, which was the predecessor to this radio. I also own a Futaba 3PV and Spectrum DX5C, which are the two main competitors to the Sanwa MX-6. So very familiar with this class of radio. So I'd consider this basically an entry-level radio. So this is something you'd want to look at if you're upgrading from an RTR radio. Maybe you're putting together your first kit build and you want to do a little racing, a little bashing, maybe a little crawling or whatever. So this is kind of aimed at that entry-level market. It's a 3-channel radio, 2.4 gigahertz obviously. Comes with a receiver, the Sanwa RX391W, and yeah, let's kind of get into it. So show you the actual radio, and we'll kind of go through how it looks, how it operates, that sort of thing, and then kind of going to go through some ratings in a bunch of different categories as usual, from 1 to 10, 1 being terrible, 10 being like perfect, and 5 being an average score, not a bad score, just average. So let's get into the radio. Here it is, the Sanwa MX-6. As I mentioned, the successor to the MXV, or maybe it's pronounced the MX-5, not really sure. But that was also a very similar radio, 3-channel, steering, throttle obviously, and then a switch for the 3rd channel. So this is very similar. When I saw the specs come out for this radio a few months ago and they announced it, I looked at it and I was like, what's the difference between this and the MXV? And to be honest with you, I was not all that impressed with what I read. I wasn't really sure I was going to pick one up. Decided, what the heck, I'll get one. I kind of like doing these reviews of these entry-level radios, and it's one of my more popular videos, so figured I'd kind of see what Sanwa has up their sleeve now as the response. So the Futaba 3PV came out about 2 years ago. The Spectrum DX5C came out about, 8 months ago. And finally, Sanwa has answered with the MX-6. And so let's get into it. So here's the radio. Let's turn it on. Power switch in the back, same as the MXV pretty much. It's got a little red LED to tell you that's on. Here's the actual menu system. The menu honestly looks exactly the same as the MXV. I can't tell any difference at all. The only difference I noticed is that this little cutout window actually is a little bit smaller on the MX-6. So if you see that flashing LCD right there, that's actually the battery. And then over here on the left on the bottom it says trim. Well, it's actually cut off. You can't actually read the whole display. So I'm not sure why they did that, but they made this window a little bit too small in my opinion, so you can't actually see all the menu items. Kind of a design, or style problem in my opinion. Other than that, you got basically the controls to go through the menu system: up, down, left, right, up, down, plus, minus. Then you got 3 switches here along the top. I think that's basically throttle trim, steering trim, and then basically the dual rate by default. It actually says DR right there for dual rate. As I mentioned, a switch for the 3rd channel. This is not proportional, so it's basically set to one value and you can turn it on and off. So really you're going to want to use that for like lights or something where you're not actually trying to control something with a bunch of different values. Here's the battery tray on the bottom. I've actually got it takes 4 AA's, as you can see. You can actually cut off this battery tray if you want and mount a Futaba plug if you wanted to run a life battery or LiPo battery. That's something I did on my MX-6. A little quick tip on these little tabs holding in the batteries are like crazy tight, so I recommend trimming these down a little bit. I haven't done it yet, but they tend to kind of rip up your batteries a little bit if you don't. Otherwise, I don't know, they don't need to be that tight, so definitely look into trimming that down. And so that basically just slides right on and fairly simple. In terms of the controls, nice foam, soft foam covered wheel. Steering wheel is quite a bit improved on the MXV. One of my main complaints with the MXV was that it was really stiff. It was actually too stiff and kind of annoying to turn. And then the throttle Trigger actually feels pretty good, pretty similar to the MX-V. I'm not sure they actually made a change. It's about a medium stiffness. Wheel is also about a medium stiffness. Now, one thing with Sanwa radios, if you own one, you'll notice actually the stiffness increases as you turn the wheel. So in neutral, you know, it's fairly light, but then as you turn it, it kind of ramps up the stiffness, and actually at full lock left and right, it's fairly stiff. That's just kind of a Sanwa thing. They do, I don't think any of the other manufacturers do that, but Sanwa kind of has that unusual feel to it. Not much slop or anything in the wheel. The trigger also feels very good. Overall, very stylish radio. Quite a bit improvement in looks over the MX-V. I like the layout of the controls. It's pretty much classic Sanwa control layout or ergonomics. This handle feels pretty much identical to the other handles on my other Sanwas. So I also own an MTS and MT4S, and this is pretty much identical. The layout is all very standard Sanwa layout, which I actually really like. I think it's one of the most comfortable and like kind of best layouts of all the entry-level radios on the market today. So getting into the rating of this radio. First thing I want to go through is basically the features that it supplies. So as mentioned, it's 3 channels, steering, throttle, and a switched auxiliary 3. If you can look at the menu system, let's go down to the first item. So obviously you have dual rate for steering. You know, there's no throttle dual rate. I guess that would make sense. So steering, dual rate, endpoint adjustments for left, for right, for throttle forward and reverse or brake. Then you also can adjust the endpoint for the auxiliary switch so that when you turn it on or off, high or low, you can actually adjust what that value is. Moving on, Expo for the steering, Expo for throttle. So Expo is basically, you can kind of adjust the curve of the steering or throttle so that basically it's normally linear, meaning the more you turn the wheel, it'll turn the steering wheel the same amount, but you can also adjust it so that kind of, you know, either you want it more sensitive or a little sensitive right off neutral, and then sort of ramp up as you get to full left, full right. So it's something it's kind of useful for racing, especially if you want to adjust the sensitivity of your vehicle. Moving on, so this does provide anti-lock brakes, really kind of the only advanced feature. You can set to slow, normal, or fast. I have played with this in the past. It is interesting and does actually work, but you know, for racing, it's not really legal. So in general, not a whole lot of people are going to use this. Also, obviously, trim adjustment for steering and throttle. And then moving on to the model. So this will can be programmed up to 10 different models. 10 different models. Sub-trim, pretty standard feature. So this is basically finer grain trim rather than trim. Normal trim usually kind of is coarse grain. You know, basically will turn the steering left or right a fairly large amount, and then sub-trim is to kind of get you that fine tuning down to the last little percent or so. So that you also have that for throttle. Reverse, so you can basically reverse all of the channels so that, you know, forward is brake or brake is forward or left is right, right is left, depending on how your servo is oriented in your vehicle. Pretty standard, including the auxiliary channel. And then you can name your models, and finally it tells you the battery of the radio transmitter. So that's pretty much it. Overall, it's a very basic radio, not a whole lot of functions. There's no stability control, there's no like speed control. Sometimes you can slow down the performance of the servos. No four-wheel steering mixing or anything like that. So yeah, overall a very simple radio. You can't really program these switches. They're just sort of fixed. So overall, fairly basic, you know. Compared to some of the other competitors, there's no telemetry or anything like that. So anyways, that's the features. That's kind of what comes you know, with the radio and what it will allow you to do. In general, I think the features are a little bit on the sparse side. It's overall a fairly basic radio for racing, for some simple bashing, but nothing too complicated, nothing too advanced here. So I'm going to give it a below average rating, 3 out of 10. You know, unfortunately, 5 being average. I think this is a little bit below average for a $109 radio today here in 2018. Let's move on to the design. I think that's kind of one of the high points of this radio. A very, very stylish radio. I think it's a very good looking radio. You know, you look at something like a Spectrum DX5C, that thing looks terrible. It looks like someone just took a block of wood and just carved it up a little bit and called it a radio. But this is very stylish. Quite a bit of improvement over the MXV. You know, it actually kind of mimics the styling of some of the higher end radios like the MT44. So you definitely look very stylish, very in control when you're standing on the driver's stand with this radio. You're just going to feel very confident with the way it looks. Personally, you know, I know design is not a whole, not super important, but it is nice to have a good looking radio, and I think that is the case here. So design-wise, I'm actually going to rate an 8 out of 10. I think it is the best looking of all the radios on the market today. The Futaba 3PV is not bad, but this is definitely a very cool looking radio. Next category is controls, and as I mentioned, standard Sanwa controls, kind of more of an upright handle. It is just sort of slick plastic, no rubberized texture or anything like that, but very comfortable. For me personally, I find the trigger layout, the wheel layout, you know, sort of a semi drop down, very comfortable. It's easy to control when you're standing there with your hands. So overall, I find the controls very good. The only thing is I really don't like, the steering wheel is still a little bit on the stiff, well, it's not really on the stiff side, but it's kind of got that ramping action moving up and down. And you know, there's no rubberized texture, no adjustable grips. But overall, you know, definitely above average. I'm going to rate it a 7 out of 10. Definitely one of the more comfortable radios for me personally, at least. Next category is quality, and that's sort of taking over what I used to call construction, and that's basically how I feel how well this radio is built. And this is actually a quite high quality radio. The only you know, all the fit and finish of the seams and everything look very good. The plastics are really nice, smooth. Overall, just a well put together radio. The only downside, as I mentioned, is that display. I don't know what they did, but they did not make this little window big enough, so it kind of obscures the bottom half of these bottom two adjustments. You can't really quite read battery and trim, so I'm going to ding it a little bit for that, but the rest of the radio is quite good. So overall, I'm going to give the quality a 5 out of 10. If the window was actually made right, I'd give it probably a 7 or 8 out of 10, but that just seemed to be an oversight there. Next thing is speed, and what do I mean by speed is basically performance. How fast is this radio? You know, in general, these radios are going to feel, you know, definitely pretty responsive, especially compared to most RTR radios. But in terms of latency or frame rate, this radio does seem a little bit slower. That was my other main complaint with the MXV, that it was a little bit on the slow side. Definitely, it's not so much that when you turn the wheel, the steering servo doesn't turn, or you pull the trigger, the car doesn't go. Speed is not going to manifest itself in that way. What you'll actually notice is that you're not going to feel just quite as in tune with the car. You're not going to feel, you know, sort of at one, or feel like you have a direct connection to the actual vehicle and the way it drives. And the reason for that is basically because it's not sampling or basically sending the signal as often as higher speed radios are. So your high-end race radios have stuff more in like the 3 to 5.5 millisecond frame rate range. This, I don't know what the actual number is, but I would guess it's probably more in like the 16 to 13 millisecond range. The MXV was also had this problem. Now I think it might be either the same or just a hair faster than MXV, but it's definitely not a super fast or responsive radio. And you're really only going to notice that if you run it back to back with other radios. So if you look at my little Traxxas Rustler here, you can see actually I have 3 different receivers in there. So I have the Futaba on the left, Spectrum in the center, and then the Sanwa ARX 391W, the receiver that came with this radio, right there in the middle. So I did test this with the other receivers. Generally, did not find it quite as responsive, so I'm going to give it a below average score in speed. I'm going to rate it a 3 out of 10. You know, for bashing or crawling or whatever, you're not really going to care, you're not going to notice. And for 95% of people, unless you actually run this back to back to back with other radios, you're probably also not going to notice. But I can, or at least I feel like I can tell a difference. So that's why I'm giving the speed a 3 out of 10. Now, one thing I wanted to mention was that they changed protocols with this radio over the MXV. So the MXV used what was called FHSS2, and this one is what a new protocol. It's called FHE, and as far as I know, it is not shared with any other receiver or protocol out there. So you will have to buy the special RX391W receivers, and no other radio will work with that. So that is kind of a bit of a concern. I thought maybe, I didn't really understand why they went from FHSS2 to FHE, and to me, there's really only two probable reasons. One is they were able to make it cheaper, or two, they were able to make it better in some way, which generally means faster. Now, as I mentioned, I don't think it's really faster. It doesn't, maybe it's a little bit faster, but it's definitely not fast. And so, as far as I can tell, really, the reason they went to FHE is to cut down costs. So the cost of the receivers used to be about $60 with the FHE receivers. Now the RX391W, it seems to be more about $49 to $50. Anyway, so moving on, the display, as I mentioned, the menu system is fine. Definitely has everything that you need for a normal vehicle, but that menu is sort of cut off. I like the up, down, left, right, or I'm sorry, plus, minus thingy. That seems to work fine. Definitely better than the Futaba, but just the fact that you can't read all the letters just seems kind of stupid. So I'm going to give the display a 4 out of 10. Moving on, binding. So this is actually one of the highlights of the radio. Binding is actually fairly simple, and I'll just kind of go through it to show you how it actually works. So you just plug in your steering and throttle connectors, have the car off, and then the radio on. And all you do is basically hold down the bind button, turn on the car, and then this whole thing will start flashing, and then you just hit the bind button on top here, right there, and it'll just basically connect. So super easy, very fast to bind. You shouldn't really have to go back to your manual and try to figure that out. So overall, I do like the binding on this vehicle. Definitely, there's no bind plugs. It's very straightforward. I'm going to rate it a 7 out of 10. Next category is receivers, and Sanwa receivers, unfortunately, are some of the most expensive receivers in the market. This is one of the cheaper ones, and this is still about $50. I mean, you can get Spectrum receivers for about $30 for like a 2-channel, $40 for a 3-channel like the SR415 here. Futaba makes this awesome R204 GFE, which is basically like a cordless receiver, and that sells for $40. So that's cheaper. I mean, then that's also a 3-channel with a 4th basically battery port. Overall, Sanwa receivers are expensive. In this case, the RX391 is a little on the big side, as you can see. Definitely kind of takes up a lot of real estate in your car. So receivers wise, unfortunately, I'm going to have to give this a 1 out of 10. It's expensive, it's big. They don't make a cordless version, at least for the FHE. And then the last one, and the big one, is really the FHE protocol is not compatible with any other Sanwa radio, or obviously any other manufacturer at all. So you're just stuck with receivers. You're stuck with this radio. You can't use a different receiver. You can't use a different radio. That's a major problem, at my point. So I'm going to give the receivers a 1 out of 10. I think Sanwa, I don't know why they did this FHE thingy. With the FHSS2s in the MXVs, actually there were some radios that could control both FHSS2 and 3 and 4, which is used by the newer radios, so that was fine. I guess they dropped the price of the receivers by $10, but they're still quite expensive, and overall that's probably really the low point of this radio system, the receivers. Moving on, the battery compartment already covered. It's just 4 AA's, that's fine. No Futaba connector to use a Life or LiPo battery, but you can cut that plug and add your own. And so I'm going to rate this a 5 out of 10 on the battery. That's fine. Next category, and the last category I'm going to talk about, is basically the value of this radio. So it retails for $109.99. That's completely par with everybody else. The Futaba 3VV is $109.99. The Spectrum DX5C also $109.99. Now they do make higher end versions of those radios, but that's not really what you're going to compare to this radio. So among the three, this is exactly the same price. Is it a good value? Well, unfortunately, features wise, there's nothing here that the other competitors don't offer. And so from that standpoint, it's not faster, it doesn't have more features. it doesn't have a better grip or, you know, more adjustments, or there's really nothing here that I can say is actually better than the other competitors. The only thing I would say might be better is the controls layout. I find this to be a very comfortable radio, especially compared to something like the Futaba 3PV, which is a very uncomfortable radio to use. So to me, these are sort of the perfect controls layout. Now, value-wise, I'm going to have to ding it quite a bit because it is expensive. The MXV was about $85 towards the end of its life, and this is $109.99. And really, they haven't improved anything on this radio. It looks better. They fixed the steering wheel problem. You know, if you have to buy more receivers, it's a little bit cheaper, but you're paying $20 more, $20 to $25 more for a radio that doesn't do anything more. So I'm not really seeing what's going on here with the Sanwa MX-6. So I'm going to give the value a 2 out of 10. It's not a good value in general. Now, obviously, it's not more expensive than the other guys, and if you just like Sanwa radios, then you're going to buy this anyways. But just comparing, you know, apples to apples, the Sanwa versus the Futaba versus the Spectrum, this is probably the lowest value, at least bang for the buck. So that's pretty much it from my review. What is the conclusion on the MX-6? Do I think you should buy one? Who would I buy this for, or you know, why would I get this radio? So the highlights of this radio for me is that it's just very comfortable to use. I like the controls. I think it's a very stylish radio. The downsides are the receivers. You know, you're not going to want to have to buy, you know, if you had like 10 cars and you're buying 10 of these receivers, that's just going to be really expensive. Other downsides is there's no advanced features, but you know, really I'd say if you're just putting together a kit and you just need one radio and one receiver, and you're never gonna build another kit, build another, you know, build like a fleet of these things, you know, then maybe you want to get one of these. If you just want kind of the best looking radio out there, I think this is definitely it. It's a very, very nice looking radio. I mean, I feel cool just holding it, using it, standing on the driver's stand with this, whereas can't quite say the same thing about my Spectrum and my Futaba 3V. I feel a little dorky sometimes using those radios, but this is a really cool looking radio. Overall, I'm slightly disappointed. I felt like Sanwa sort of had a chance to answer the Futaba 3PV and the DX5C and try to do something different, new, better, faster, whatever, and they really didn't do much. I feel like they kind of mailed it in with this radio. They just kind of updated the looks, and whoever designed this, you know, should get a promotion because it's a good looking radio, but they just kind of updated the looks, just kind of fixed the stiff steering wheel, and then changed to FHE, which honestly probably was not really necessary. So overall, it's still a solid radio, and you know, definitely not a bad radio in any other way. Just in 2018, I just feel like Sanwa probably could have done more. So anyways, that's it. Hope that video and review helped you. I know it was a little bit long, as a lot of these review videos are, but please like, subscribe to my channel, hit the add notifications button if you want to hear about more reviews, more videos as they come out. And thanks for watching. Definitely throw down some comments. Let me know what you think about this radio. Did this impress you? Did it disappoint you? Do you own one? Are you thinking about buying one? Anything else you'd like to say about this radio that maybe I missed? But anyways, that's pretty much it for my review.